The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Westfield Shopping Center as early shoppers began arriving for another busy Saturday. Among the scattered shopping carts near the entrance, one stood apart from the rest. Inside it sat a small German Shepherd puppy, no more than 4 months old, his dark eyes scanning every face that passed by. Max had been sitting there since dawn, his small body trembling not from the cold but from confusion and hope. His thick puppy coat was a beautiful blend of black and tan, typical of his breed, but now it was dusty and unkempt. The red collar around his neck was too big, sliding down toward his shoulders whenever he moved his head. A small metal tag dangled from it, catching the light occasionally as he shifted position. People walked past the shopping cart, some glancing at the unusual sight, others too busy with their phones or conversations to notice. Max's ears perked up at every footstep, his tail giving a hesitant wag whenever someone approached. But each time the person would pass by, and his tail would slowly lower again. An elderly woman named Margaret was the first to really stop and look. She had been coming to the shopping center for 20 years, and she had never seen anything like this. The puppy was sitting perfectly still in the cart, as if he had been trained to stay there. His posture was alert but patient, like he was waiting for someone very important. "Hello there, little one," Margaret said softly, approaching the cart slowly. Max's whole body wiggled with excitement. His tail began wagging so hard it made his entire rear end move back and forth. He stood up in the cart, placing his front paws on the edge, but he didn't try to jump out. Instead, he whined softly, a sound that seemed to say both hello and please don't leave me. Margaret looked around the parking lot, expecting to see an owner nearby. Perhaps someone was loading groceries into their car and would return any moment. But the minutes passed and no one came. She noticed that the puppy had no water or food bowl, and his tongue was hanging out slightly, suggesting he was thirsty. "Where are your people, sweetheart?" she asked, reaching out to pet his head. Max leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly with relief at the human contact. Margaret felt her heart break a little. This wasn't a lost dog who had wandered away from home. This was a dog who had been placed in this cart and left here intentionally. As more shoppers arrived, word began to spread about the puppy in the shopping cart. A small group gathered around, everyone asking the same questions. How long had he been there? Who would do such a thing? Should someone call animal control? But despite all the attention, Max kept his focus on the main entrance of the shopping center, as if he knew exactly where his family would appear from when they returned for him. A security guard named Tom approached the growing crowd. He had been working at the shopping center for 5 years and had seen his share of strange situations. But this was a first. The puppy was clearly well-bred, probably worth several $100s. His coat, despite being dirty, was thick and healthy. His structure was good, with a strong, confident stance typical of German Shepherds, even at his young age. "Has anyone called the police or animal services?" Tom asked the group. Several people nodded, pulling out their phones. Margaret stayed close to the cart, continuing to pet Max, who seemed to find comfort in her presence while never taking his attention completely away from watching for his family. Tom examined the situation more carefully. The shopping cart wasn't from their center, it was from a grocery store across town. Someone had brought this cart here specifically. The puppy's collar had a phone number on the tag, but when Tom called it, the number was disconnected. There was no name, no address, just a useless number that led nowhere. Dr. Sarah Chen, a veterinarian who happened to be shopping that morning, stopped when she saw the commotion. After introducing herself, she was allowed to examine Max briefly. "He's healthy," she announced to the group. "Well-fed, no signs of abuse or neglect. His teeth and gums look good, his eyes are clear. This is a puppy who has been cared for, at least until recently." This information made the situation even more puzzling. Why would someone who had obviously invested time and money in caring for this puppy suddenly abandon him in a shopping cart? Dr. Chen estimated that Max was about 16 weeks old, right at the age when puppies begin to require more training, more attention, and more expensive veterinary care like vaccinations and spaying or neutering. As the morning progressed, Max never left his position in the cart. Even when people offered him water, which he drank gratefully, he returned to his sitting position facing the main entrance. His behavior suggested that he had been trained to stay, and he was following that training perfectly, even in this confusing situation. Margaret found herself unable to leave. She had planned to do her weekly grocery shopping and return home to tend her garden, but something about Max's unwavering hope kept her there. She watched as his head turned toward every car that pulled into the parking lot, his ears perking up at every voice that carried across the asphalt. The most heartbreaking moments came when families with children walked by. Max would become especially excited, his tail wagging furiously, his whole body practically vibrating with anticipation. But each time, the family would continue on their way and Max would settle back into his patient waiting position. By noon, Animal Control Officer Jake Williams arrived. He was known in the community for his compassionate approach to animal situations, and he had dealt with many abandonment cases over his 15-year career. But he had never seen a dog maintain such perfect behavior in such a stressful situation. "This is remarkable," Jake said, observing Max's calm demeanor despite all the activity around him. "Most abandoned animals are frantic, trying to escape or crying constantly. This little guy is showing incredible discipline and hope." Jake's experience told him that Max had probably been abandoned by a family facing a crisis, perhaps a sudden move, a financial emergency, or a housing situation that wouldn't allow pets. The disconnected phone number suggested they wanted to make it impossible for the dog to be returned to them, probably because they knew they couldn't provide proper care anymore. As the afternoon approached, it became clear that no one was coming back for Max. His faithful wait was going to continue, but not much longer in that shopping cart. Jake would have to take him to the animal shelter, where he would wait in a different kind of way for a new family to find him. But first, they would give his original family until closing time to return, just in case there had been some terrible misunderstanding. Max continued his vigil, unaware that his life was about to change forever. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the shopping center parking lot, but Max remained steadfast in his cart. His pink tongue hung out longer now and his breathing had become more labored. Margaret had made several trips to her car to retrieve a bowl and bottles of water, creating a small oasis of care around the abandoned puppy. Dr. Sarah Chen had returned after completing her errands, bringing with her a small bag of puppy food and a collapsible shade umbrella. "We can't let him get heat. Stroke while he's waiting," she explained, to the group of concerned shoppers who had maintained a rotating vigil around Max throughout the day. As she set up the umbrella to provide shade, Max looked up at her with grateful eyes but still didn't attempt to leave his post. Even when she placed the food bowl within easy reach, he only ate a few kibbles before returning his attention to the main entrance. His loyalty was both admirable and heartbreaking to witness. Officer Jake Williams had been checking in every hour, documenting the situation and taking photographs. The shopping center's security cameras had been reviewed, showing that Max had been placed in the cart around 6 in the morning by a woman in her 30s with 2 young children. The footage was too grainy to make out faces clearly, but it showed the woman crying as she walked away, looking back several times before disappearing from view. "She didn't want to do this," Tom, the security guard, observed as they watched the footage together. "You can see her hesitation, the way she keeps turning back. Something forced her hand." Local news reporter Amanda Rodriguez arrived around 3 o'clock, having received a tip about the unusual story. As she set up her camera, Max became alert again, perhaps hoping this new person with equipment might be connected to his missing family. His tail gave a tentative wag, but when Amanda began speaking to her camera instead of to him, he settled back into his waiting position. The news segment, which would air on the evening broadcast, captured Max's unwavering dedication perfectly. Amanda's report highlighted not just the abandonment, but the extraordinary behavior of a puppy, who seemed to understand that good dogs wait patiently for their families to return. Throughout the afternoon, dozens of people stopped to check on Max. Some brought water, others offered food, and many simply stood and marveled at his discipline and hope. Children were especially drawn to him, asking their parents why the pretty puppy was sitting alone in a cart. 8-year-old Emma Patterson was one of those children. She had been shopping with her mother when they encountered the crowd around Max. "Mom, can we take him home?" Emma asked, her eyes wide with compassion. He looked so sad and lonely. Her mother, Linda, knelt down to explain. "Sweetie, this puppy is waiting for his family. They might come back for him, and we need to give them that chance first." But privately, Linda was already thinking about their empty house and how much joy a dog might bring to their lives. As the day wore on, Max's story began spreading through social media. Margaret had posted about the situation on the community Facebook page, and within hours, the story had been shared hundreds of times. People were offering to adopt Max, to foster him temporarily, and to help with veterinary expenses. The community's response was overwhelming, but Max remained focused on his singular hope, that his original family would return. Dr. Chen checked on him again around 5 o'clock, concerned about his prolonged stress and exposure. "His vital signs are still good," she reported to Jake, "but we need to consider his emotional well-being too. Dogs can experience anxiety and depression just like humans, especially during traumatic separations." The veterinarian's professional opinion was that Max was displaying what animal behaviorists call protest behavior, the first stage of separation anxiety. He was actively searching and waiting for his missing family members. If they didn't return, he would eventually move into a despair phase, becoming withdrawn and depressed, before finally reaching a detachment phase where he might accept new relationships. The good news, Dr. Chen explained to the growing crowd of supporters, is that he's young enough to recover from this trauma completely, provided he receives proper care and a loving new home. As closing time for the shopping center approached, Jake knew he would have to make the difficult decision to transport Max to the animal shelter. The puppy had been in that cart for over 12 hours, and while he had remained remarkably calm, the stress was beginning to show. His eyes, while still alert, had lost some of their earlier brightness. Margaret approached Jake with a heavy heart. "Officer Williams, I know you have to take him to the shelter, but I want to make sure he gets the best possible care. What can we do to help him through this transition?" Jake appreciated her concern. In his experience, community involvement often made the difference between a successful rehoming and a tragic outcome. "The shelter has an excellent foster program," he explained. "If someone could take him temporarily while we process his intake and look for a permanent home, it would be much better for his emotional recovery than staying in a kennel." Linda Patterson, who had returned to check on Max several times throughout the day, stepped forward. "I'd like to foster him," she said quietly. "My daughter Emma has been talking about him all afternoon, and we have experience with dogs. Our last German Shepherd passed away 2 years ago, and our house feels too empty." Emma, who had been tugging on her mother's sleeve, broke into a huge smile. "Really, Mom? We can take him home tonight?" Jake looked at Linda with professional scrutiny. "Fostering is a serious commitment. You'd need to bring him to veterinary appointments, help socialize him, and be prepared for the possibility that his original family might still claim him within the legal holding period." "I understand completely," Linda replied. "We're prepared for whatever happens. Right now, this little guy just needs a safe, loving place to wait." As the legal paperwork was being prepared, Max seemed to sense that his long vigil in the cart was coming to an end. He finally stood up and stretched, his first real movement in hours. When Linda approached the cart, he sniffed her hand carefully, then looked once more toward the shopping center entrance. The sun was setting now, painting the parking lot in golden hues. The crowd of supporters had grown throughout the day, and many had lingered to see what would happen to their little hero. There were tears in many eyes as Jake gently lifted Max from the cart where he had waited so faithfully. For just a moment, as he was transferred from the cart to Linda's arms, Max struggled slightly and looked back toward the entrance. His soft whine seemed to ask if they were sure his family wasn't coming. But then he settled against Linda's chest, his exhaustion finally showing as his small body relaxed for the first time all day. Margaret wiped away tears as she watched the transfer. "He waited so long," she whispered. "I hope someday he understands that his loyalty was seen and appreciated by all of us." As Linda carried Max toward her car, Emma walking proudly beside them, the puppy lifted his head once more to look back at the shopping cart where he had spent the longest day of his young life. Then, perhaps accepting that his wait was over, he rested his head against his new temporary guardian and closed his eyes. The shopping cart sat empty now, a silent testament to one small dog's incredible faith and patience. The Patterson house felt different that evening as Linda carried Max through the front door. The familiar scent of home, mixed with the lingering aroma of dinner, seemed to awaken something in the exhausted puppy. For the first time since morning, his tail gave a genuine wag as he took in his new surroundings. Emma had spent the car ride home chattering excitedly about all the things she wanted to show Max, but now that they were actually inside, she seemed to understand that he needed time to adjust. She sat quietly on the living room floor, letting him approach her at his own pace. Max's first priority was clearly water. Linda set down a large bowl and he drank deeply, his small pink tongue lapping steadily for nearly 2 minutes. The stress of his long day had clearly dehydrated him more than anyone had realized. After drinking, he sat down and looked around the house methodically, as if memorizing every detail of this new environment. The living room was warm and inviting, with comfortable furniture and family photos covering every available surface. A large window faced the front yard, and Max noticed it immediately. He walked over and sat beneath it, looking out at the street, with the same patient attention he had shown at the shopping center. "Oh no," Linda said softly, recognizing the behavior. "He's still watching for them." Dr. Chen had warned them about this possibility during their brief conversation at the shopping center. Abandoned animals often continued their search behavior, even in new environments, especially during the first few days. Max's vigil wasn't over. It had simply moved to a new location. Emma's father, David, arrived home from work to find his daughter sitting on the floor near Max, reading aloud from one of her favorite books. The puppy wasn't really listening to the story, but he seemed comforted by the gentle sound of her voice and her calm presence. "So this is our temporary house guest," David said, kneeling down to Max's level. As a former military man, he appreciated discipline and loyalty when he saw it. "You waited all day for them, didn't you, buddy?" Max looked at David with intelligent eyes, as if he understood the question. His expression seemed to convey both sadness and hope, a combination that tugged at David's heart. They had discussed getting another dog many times since losing their beloved German Shepherd, Rex, but they had never found the right moment or the right dog. The evening routine in the Patterson household was well established, but everything felt different with Max there. He followed Linda to the kitchen during dinner preparation, not begging for food, but simply observing. When the family sat down to eat, he positioned himself where he could see both the dining room and the front window, maintaining his watch even while accepting this new reality. After dinner, Emma wanted to show Max her room, but he was reluctant to go upstairs. He kept looking back toward the window, torn between exploring his new environment and maintaining his surveillance of the street. Finally, Linda made the decision. For him, gently leading him upstairs while Emma carried his food and water bowls. Emma's room was a typical 8-year-old space filled with stuffed animals, books, and colorful posters. Max sniffed everything carefully, his tail wagging slightly when he encountered Emma's collection of stuffed dogs. But even here, he found a spot near the window where he could continue his watch. Bedtime proved to be the most challenging part of the day. Max had never slept anywhere but his original home, and the unfamiliarity of the new house made him restless. Linda had prepared a comfortable bed for him in Emma's room, complete with soft blankets and a few toys, but he showed little interest in settling down. Instead, he paced between Emma's bed and the window, occasionally whining softly. His distress was evident, and Emma's heart broke watching him struggle with the transition. "Mom," she whispered, "can he sleep on my bed tonight? Just so he doesn't feel so alone?" Linda normally had strict rules about pets on furniture, but these were extraordinary circumstances. "Just for tonight," she agreed, helping Max onto Emma's bed. The moment he settled next to the little girl, his whole body relaxed. Her warm presence seemed to provide the comfort he desperately needed. But sleep didn't come easily for Max. Every car that passed on the street outside caught his attention. Every sound made his ears perk up. Emma, exhausted from the emotional day, fell asleep quickly with her arm draped protectively over the puppy. Max remained alert much longer, his eyes moving between the window and Emma's sleeping face. Around midnight, a car slowed down in front of the Patterson house, its headlights sweeping across the bedroom window. Max immediately became alert, his body tense with hope. He carefully extracted himself from Emma's embrace and pressed his nose against the glass, his tail beginning to wag tentatively. But the car continued down the street, and Max's tail slowly stopped moving. He stood at the window for several more minutes, as if willing the car to return before finally returning to the bed. This pattern repeated several times throughout the night, making for a restless sleep for everyone. The next morning brought new challenges. Max showed little interest in breakfast, picking at his food half-heartedly before returning to his post at the living room window. Linda had taken the day off work to help him adjust, but it was clear that his emotional recovery was going to take time. Dr. Chen called around 10 o'clock to check on Max's first night. "It's completely normal for him to be disoriented and still searching," she assured Linda. "The important thing is to maintain a routine and provide consistent care. His trust will build gradually." The veterinarian also explained that Max would need a thorough examination within the next few days, including vaccinations and a general health check. "Given his excellent condition when we found him, I suspect he's up to date on most of his shots, but we need to establish a proper medical record." Throughout the morning, neighbors began stopping by to check on Max and offer their support. Word had spread quickly through the community about the puppy who had waited faithfully in the shopping cart, and everyone wanted to help ensure his successful recovery. Margaret, the elderly woman who had first discovered Max, arrived around lunchtime with a homemade dog bed and several toys. "I couldn't stop thinking about him," she explained to Linda. "I've had dogs my whole life, and I've never seen such loyalty in such a young puppy." Max showed polite interest in Margaret's visit, but his attention remained divided between his new visitors and his vigilant watch of the street. His behavior was heartbreakingly consistent. Hope mixed with growing confusion about why his original family hadn't returned for him. Emma tried various tactics to engage Max throughout the day. She brought him toys, tried to teach him simple tricks, and even attempted to interest him in children's television programs featuring animals. He responded politely to her efforts, but never with the enthusiastic joy typical of puppies his age. The most telling moment came in the afternoon when a delivery truck pulled up outside the house. Max became intensely focused, his whole body vibrating with anticipation as he watched a delivery person walk up to the front door. When Linda signed for the package and the truck drove away, Max's disappointment was palpable. He sat at the window for a long time afterward, his head drooping slightly. "He's waiting for a specific car, isn't he?" Emma observed with wisdom beyond her years. "He knows what their car looks like, and he's watching for it." Linda nodded, feeling a deep sadness for the little dog who couldn't understand why his family had disappeared. The innocence of his hope was both beautiful and tragic, a reminder of the pure, unconditional love that dogs offer to their humans. As the second day in his new temporary home came to an end, Max had made some progress. He had eaten a full meal, played briefly with Emma, and even explored the backyard under supervision. But his fundamental behavior remained unchanged. He was still waiting, still hoping, still believing that his original family would return for him. The question that haunted the Patterson family was whether Max's faith would eventually fade, allowing him to form new attachments, or whether his loyalty would become a permanent barrier to finding happiness in a new home. 3 weeks had passed since Max first arrived at the Patterson household, and while he had settled into their routine, his heart remained elsewhere. Every morning, he would take up his position at the living room window, watching the street with the same unwavering attention he had shown that first day at the shopping center. Linda had established a daily schedule that included walks, meals, and playtime, hoping that consistency would help Max feel more secure. He participated in all these activities willingly, but always with a distracted air, as if he were simply passing time until his real life resumed. The local veterinary examination had revealed what Dr. Chen suspected. Max was in excellent health and had been well cared for before his abandonment. His vaccinations were current, his teeth were clean, and his overall condition suggested a family that had invested significant time and money in his care. This made his abandonment even more mysterious and heartbreaking. Officer Jake Williams had continued investigating Max's background, following up on tips from people who had seen the news story. Several leads had emerged, but none had panned out. A family matching the security camera description had been located, but they had never owned a German Shepherd. Another tip led to a breeder who had sold a similar puppy months earlier, but their records showed the new owners had moved out of state. The most promising lead came from a woman named Carol Stevens, who recognized Max from a newspaper photo. She was certain she had seen him playing in the yard of a house 3 neighborhoods away, but when authorities investigated, they found the house empty with a "for rent" sign in the yard. Neighbors confirmed that a young family with 2 children and a German Shepherd puppy had lived there until recently, but they had moved out suddenly in the middle of the night. "It's like they vanished," Jake explained to Linda during one of his regular check-ins. No forwarding address, no contact information left with the landlord, nothing. The rent was paid through the end of the month and then they were just gone. This information painted a clearer picture of what might have happened: a family in crisis, possibly facing eviction or financial ruin, making the desperate decision to abandon their beloved pet, rather than take him into an uncertain future. The disconnected phone number, the careful placement in a public location where he would be found quickly, the timing of the abandonment all suggested people who cared deeply but felt they had no choice. Emma had become Max's primary companion during these weeks, and she was the only person who could occasionally distract him from his window vigil. She would sit beside him and read stories, practice her school presentations, or simply chatter about her day. Max seemed to find comfort in her presence even if his attention remained divided. The breakthrough moment came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Emma was practicing piano in the living room when she made a mistake and started over again, playing the same simple melody repeatedly. Max, who had been at his usual post by the window, suddenly walked over and sat next to the piano bench. For the first time since his arrival, he seemed genuinely interested in something happening in his new home, rather than what might be happening outside. Emma noticed immediately and began playing more softly, watching Max's reaction. His tail gave a small wag and he rested his chin on the piano bench, looking up at her with engaged, attentive eyes. "Mom," Emma called excitedly. "Max likes music. He's really listening to me play." Linda came running from the kitchen to witness this small miracle. Max was still sitting by the piano, his focus completely on Emma for the first time in weeks. When Emma resumed playing, his tail wagged again and he made a small contented sound that was almost like singing. This discovery led to daily piano sessions that became the highlight of Max's routine. Every afternoon when Emma practiced, he would leave his window post and sit beside her, sometimes even placing his paw on the bench as if he wanted to participate. Music seemed to be the key that could unlock his attention from his constant vigil. Dr. Chen was fascinated by this development when Linda called to report it. "Music therapy is used with traumatized animals sometimes," she explained. "It's possible that his original family played music, and it's triggering positive memories. Or it could simply be that Emma's playing creates a soothing environment that helps reduce his anxiety." The piano sessions also marked the beginning of Max's gradual integration into the Patterson family's daily life. He began following Linda to the kitchen during meal preparation, not just observing but actually interacting with her. When David worked in his home office, Max started spending time there too, lying on the floor near the desk instead of maintaining his constant window watch. But the most significant change came during their evening walks. Initially, Max had been reluctant to leave the house as if he feared missing his family's return. He would walk a short distance and then pull back toward home, constantly looking over his shoulder. But as the weeks passed, he began to show genuine interest in their neighborhood explorations. One evening, while walking past a playground, Max encountered a group of children playing with their parents. Instead of his usual polite but distant demeanor, he showed real excitement, his tail wagging as he approached the fence. The children were delighted to meet him, and for 20 minutes Max engaged in the kind of playful interaction typical of puppies his age. "Look at him," Emma whispered to her mother. "He's actually playing and having fun." Linda watched with mixed emotions as Max wrestled gently with a stick thrown by one of the children, his movements full of the joy and energy that had been suppressed since his abandonment. It was wonderful to see him acting like a normal puppy, but it also raised difficult questions about his future. The legal holding period for abandoned animals was nearly over, which meant that Max would soon be available for permanent adoption. Several families had already expressed interest, drawn by his story and impressed by his gentle nature during visits. But Linda found herself increasingly reluctant to discuss his placement with potential adopters. The truth was that the entire Patterson family had fallen in love with Max. His quiet dignity, His gradual warming to their family and his obvious intelligence had made him feel like he belonged with them. Emma talked about him constantly at school. David had begun researching German Shepherd training techniques, and Linda found herself planning their weekend activities around Max's needs and preferences. But they had committed to fostering him temporarily, with the understanding that his permanent placement would be handled through proper channels. The family had to consider whether their attachment to Max was in his best interest or whether he might be better served by a fresh start with a family who hadn't witnessed his trauma. The decision became more complicated when Dr. Chen called with news about Max's microchip. Every pet placed with a chip has information registered with a national database. But Max's chip registration led to the same disconnected phone number from his collar. However, the veterinary clinic that had implanted the chip had maintained their own records. I spoke with Dr. Martinez at Riverside Animal Clinic, Dr. Chen reported. Max was brought in for his puppy vaccinations by a family named Williams. They have 2 young children, Sarah and Michael, ages 6 and 8. The father is a construction worker who was laid off 6 months ago, and the mother works part-time at a daycare center. This information provided the missing pieces of Max's story. The Williams family had loved him enough to provide proper veterinary care, but economic hardship had probably forced impossible choices. The sudden nighttime move suggested eviction and taking a young, energetic dog into a homeless shelter or temporary housing situation would have been extremely difficult. Dr. Martinez said the mother was in tears during Max's last visit. Dr. Chen continued. She asked a lot of questions about what would happen to a dog if a family couldn't keep him anymore. At the time, he thought she was just being cautious, but now it makes sense. With this new information, the authorities had a better chance of locating Max's original family, which raised fresh questions about his future. If the Williams family was found and their situation had improved, would Max be returned to them? How would that affect his bond with the Patterson family? And most importantly, what would be best for Max himself? As Linda tucked Emma into bed that night, Max curled up beside her as had become his custom. The little girl asked the question that had been haunting all of them. Mom, what happens if Max's first family comes back for him? Linda didn't have an answer, but she knew that their quiet, patient houseguest was about to face another major transition in his young life. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Max was enjoying his usual piano session with Emma. Linda answered the phone to find Officer Jake Williams on the other end, his voice carrying both excitement and apprehension. We found them, Jake announced. The Williams family. They're living in a temporary housing facility across town, and Mrs. Williams broke down crying when I mentioned Max. They've been heartbroken about leaving him behind. Linda's hands trembled as she absorbed this news. In the living room, she could hear Emma playing Max's favorite melody while he sat beside her, completely content in what had become his routine. The past month had transformed him from a traumatized, waiting dog into a happy, integrated family member. Now everything was about to change again. What happens next? Linda asked, dreading the answer. We're required to contact the original owners when they're located, Jake explained. Mrs. Williams wants to see Max immediately. She's been worried sick about him, wondering if he was safe and cared for. But she also understands that circumstances have changed for everyone involved. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult Linda had ever experienced. Jake explained that the Williams family's situation had somewhat stabilized. Mr. Williams had found steady work with a construction company, and they were hoping to move into a small apartment within the next few weeks. The temporary housing facility didn't allow pets, but they were desperately hoping to reunite with Max once they found permanent housing. After hanging up the phone, Linda stood in her kitchen staring out at the backyard where Max often played with Emma. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that the dog she had grown to love might be leaving? How do you prepare a traumatized animal for another major disruption to his newly stable life? The meeting was arranged for that afternoon at the animal shelter, neutral territory where everyone could assess the situation carefully. Linda spent the morning preparing Emma for what might happen, explaining that Max's original family had been found and that they loved him very much too. But he's happy here. Emma protested, tears streaming down her face. He likes my piano playing and he sleeps on my bed and he knows our routine. Why do they get him back when they're the ones who left him? It was an impossible question to answer, in a way that would satisfy an 8-year-old's sense of justice. Linda did her best to explain adult problems like homelessness, economic hardship, and the desperate choices parents sometimes have to make, but Emma's heart was breaking for the dog who had become her best friend. Max seemed to sense that something significant was happening. As Linda prepared to leave for the shelter, he became agitated, pacing between his usual window post and the front door. His behavior suggested he remembered car rides that led to major changes in his life, and he wasn't eager to experience another one. The drive to the shelter was quiet, except for Max's occasional whining from the back seat. Emma sat beside him, her arm around his neck, whispering promises that everything would be okay, even though she didn't believe it herself. At the shelter, Jake Williams was waiting with a woman and 2 children in the parking lot. Even from a distance, Linda could see the family's reaction when they spotted Max through the car window. The woman, presumably Mrs. Williams, pressed her hands to her mouth and began crying. The 2 children, a boy and a girl about Emma's age, started jumping up and down with excitement. Max's reaction was even more dramatic. The moment he saw the Williams family, his entire body went rigid with shock, then exploded into frantic movement. He began whining, barking, and trying to climb over the car seats to get closer to the window. His tail wagged so violently it seemed like it might detach from his body. "Max, Max," the children were calling, and at the sound of their voices, he became almost desperate to reach them. Linda had never seen him display such intense emotion, not even during his most hopeful moments watching from windows. When Linda opened the car door, Max shot out like a rocket, dragging his leash as he raced toward his original family. The reunion was overwhelming to witness. He jumped on Mrs. Williams first, covering her face with kisses while she sobbed and hugged him. Then he turned to the children, who had fallen to their knees to embrace him at his level. "We missed you so much, boy," Mrs. Williams kept repeating through her tears. "We never wanted to leave you. We're so sorry, so sorry." Max seemed to be trying to touch all 3 family members at once, moving frantically between them as if he couldn't believe they were really there. His joy was pure and desperate, the reunion of someone who had never stopped believing this moment would come. Emma watched from beside the car, her own tears falling silently as she witnessed Max's overwhelming happiness at seeing his original family. Despite her heartbreak, she could see that this was where Max truly belonged. His behavior with the Williams family was completely different from his polite affection toward the Pattersons. This was his pack, his real family, the people he had been waiting for all along. After the initial reunion, everyone moved inside the shelter for a more structured conversation. Mrs. Williams, whose first name was Jennifer, explained their situation while Max refused to leave her side, pressing against her legs as if afraid she might disappear again. "We lost our apartment when Tom lost his construction job," Jennifer explained, her hand constantly stroking Max's head. "We had nowhere to go that would take a dog, and the homeless shelter said absolutely no pets. We thought we could get back on our feet quickly, maybe find a place within a week or 2 and then come back for him." She looked down at Max, her voice breaking. "We drove around for hours that morning trying to figure out what to do. The kids were crying, I was crying, Tom was beside himself. We finally decided the shopping center was the safest place because we knew someone would find him quickly and take care of him." Tom Williams, a quiet man with calloused hands, spoke up for the first time. "We've driven past that shopping center every week, hoping to see him, hoping maybe he was still waiting for us. We didn't dare stop because we knew we still couldn't take him home." The children, Sarah and Michael, sat on the floor with Max between them, and Linda could see how naturally he fit with them. They knew exactly how he liked to be petted, which games he enjoyed, what words made his ears perk up. This wasn't just a dog they had owned. This was a dog they had raised from puppyhood, who was woven into the fabric of their family life. Jake Williams facilitated the difficult conversation about Max's future. The Williams family situation had improved, but they were still in temporary housing. They hoped to move into a pet-friendly apartment within a month, but nothing was guaranteed. Meanwhile, Max had thrived with the Patterson family and had formed genuine attachments there too. "What's best for Max?" Linda asked, even though the question broke her heart. "He's been through so much trauma already." Dr. Chen, who had arrived to provide professional input, observed Max's interactions with both families. "Dogs are remarkably adaptable," she said carefully. but they also form primary attachments that don't disappear even when secondary attachments develop. Max clearly recognizes and bonds with both families, but his behavior suggests his deepest loyalty remains with the Williams family. The solution that emerged was both practical and heartbreaking. The Williams family couldn't take Max immediately, but they desperately wanted him back once they secured permanent housing. The Patterson family loved him but recognized that his heart belonged elsewhere. An agreement was reached that Max would remain with the Pattersons for another month, while the Williams family finalized their housing situation. But first, Max would spend the weekend with his original family at a pet-friendly hotel, allowing them to reconnect and assess whether the bond was still strong enough for a permanent reunion. If everything went well, the transition would happen gradually to minimize trauma for everyone involved. As the meeting concluded, the most difficult moment came when Max had to choose which car to ride in. He stood in the parking lot looking back and forth between the two families, clearly torn. Emma knelt down and whispered something in his ear, then gently guided him toward the Williams family's car. "Go with your real family," she told him through her tears. "We'll see you soon." Max licked Emma's face once as if thanking her for understanding, then jumped into the back seat with Sarah and Michael Williams. As the car pulled away, he pressed his face against the rear window, looking back at the Patterson family with what seemed like gratitude mixed with confusion. Linda put her arm around Emma as they watched the car disappear down the street. "Did we do the right thing?" Emma asked. "Yes," Linda replied, though her own heart was breaking. Love sometimes means letting go so someone else can be happy. But even as she said it, Linda wondered if Max's story of faithful waiting was truly over, or if it was about to begin a new chapter with even more complexity and heartache. The weekend at the pet-friendly hotel proved to be both a blessing and a revelation for everyone involved. Max spent every moment glued to the Williams family, as if making up for lost time and ensuring they couldn't disappear again. He slept between Sarah and Michael on their bed, followed Jennifer to the bathroom, and positioned himself where he could see Tom at all times. But something unexpected happened during those 2 days. While Max was clearly overjoyed to be with his original family, he also displayed signs of anxiety that hadn't been present at the Patterson house. He paced restlessly, startled at unfamiliar sounds, and seemed unable to fully relax even in their presence. Jennifer called Linda on Sunday evening with a trembling voice. "I think we need to talk," she said. "Max is happy to see us, but he's also different, more nervous, more clingy. Dr. Chen said this might happen." The truth was that Max's month with the Patterson family had changed him in ways no one had fully anticipated. He had learned to feel secure in a stable environment, and now even being with his beloved, original family in an unfamiliar place was triggering his abandonment. "Trauma all over again," Linda suggested. They meet at the Patterson house the next day, so everyone could observe Max's behavior in the environment where he had found peace. It was an emotionally charged suggestion, but everyone agreed it was necessary to understand what would truly be best for Max. When the Williams family arrived at the Patterson house Monday afternoon, Max's reaction was telling. He was excited to see his original family, but he also immediately ran to check his favorite spots: the living room window, Emma's piano bench, his bed in Emma's room. It was as if he needed to confirm that his safe haven still existed. Emma, who had spent the weekend grieving Max's departure, was confused by his return but tried to hide her renewed hope. She sat at the piano and began playing his favorite melody, and Max immediately left the Williams family to sit beside her, just as he had every day for the past month. "He does that every afternoon," Linda explained to Jennifer, who watched with a mixture of amazement and sadness. "Music seems to calm him more than anything else." Over the course of the afternoon, it became clear that Max was genuinely torn between two families. With the Williams children, he played with an enthusiasm and familiarity that spoke to deep, long-established bonds. But with Emma, he displayed a gentle protectiveness and calm contentment that suggested healing and growth. Dr. Chen arrived to observe these interactions and provide professional guidance. She spent an hour watching Max with both families, taking notes on his stress signals, comfort behaviors, and overall emotional state. "This is more complex than a simple reunion," she finally announced. "Max has formed what we call secure attachment with both families, but for different reasons. The Williams family represents his original pack bond, his foundational relationships. The Patterson family represents safety and healing after trauma. The veterinarian explained that Max was essentially caught between two types of love: the deep, instinctual bond with his original family and the therapeutic, stabilizing relationship he had developed during his recovery period. "What does this mean for Max's future?" Tom Williams asked, his voice heavy with emotion. Dr. Chen chose her words carefully. In an ideal world, Max would benefit from maintaining connections with both families. The Williams family provides him with his core identity and primary bonds. The Patterson family provides him with emotional stability and security. The suggestion that emerged from this conversation was unprecedented in Linda's experience with animal fostering. What if Max could have two families? What if the solution wasn't choosing between them but finding a way to honor both relationships? Jennifer Williams looked at Linda with tears in her eyes. "Would you consider some kind of shared arrangement? I know it sounds crazy, but I can see how much you love him and I can see how much he needs you too." The idea was radical but not impossible. The Williams family was hoping to move into an apartment complex only 15 minutes from the Patterson house. Max could live primarily with his original family, but spend certain days with the Pattersons, especially when the Williams family faced housing instability or other challenges. Emma's face lit up with hope for the first time since Max's departure. "Like divorced parents sharing custody?" she asked with 8-year-old directness. "Something like that," Linda replied, though she wondered if such an arrangement could actually work long-term. Officer Jake Williams, who had arrived to check on the situation, was initially skeptical. "I've never seen anything like this attempted," he admitted. "Most animals adapt to one primary home and family, but Dr. Chen was intrigued by the possibility. German Shepherds are particularly intelligent and adaptable dogs," she pointed out. "They often work successfully with multiple handlers in professional settings. If both families are committed to making it work, and if Max shows positive responses to the arrangement, it could be beneficial for everyone." The logistics were complicated, but not insurmountable. Max would need consistent routines in both homes, regular veterinary care coordinated between families, and careful monitoring to ensure the arrangement wasn't causing him additional stress. More importantly, both families would need to put Max's well-being above their own desires for exclusive ownership. It would require unprecedented cooperation, communication, and selflessness from everyone involved. Tom Williams was the first to voice the concerns everyone was thinking. "What if it doesn't work? What if Max gets confused or stressed by going back and forth?" "Then we'll modify the arrangement or make different decisions," Linda replied. "The important thing is that we're all committed to doing what's best for Max, even if it means making sacrifices." Emma, who had been listening to the adult conversation with serious attention, suddenly stood up and walked over to Max. She knelt down and took his face in her small hands, looking directly into his eyes. "Max," she said solemnly, "you get to have two families who love you. That makes you the luckiest dog in the world." As if he understood her words, Max's tail began to wag, and he looked around the room at all the adults who were trying so hard to solve his complex situation. For the first time since his abandonment, he seemed truly relaxed, as if he finally understood that love didn't have to mean choosing and that his faithful waiting had led to something better than he could have imagined. The decision was made to try a gradual shared custody arrangement, with Max spending 4 days a week with the Williams family and 3 days with the Pattersons. They would maintain this schedule for a month and then reassess based on Max's behavior and adjustment. As the Williams family prepared to leave with Max for their first official custody period, he seemed different than he had during the weekend hotel stay. He was still excited to go with them, but he wasn't frantic or desperate. Instead, he appeared confident that this wasn't another abandonment, but simply part of his new, expanded family structure. He said goodbye to Emma by resting his head on her lap during her evening piano practice, then walked calmly to the Williams family's car. Before getting in, he looked back at the Patterson house once, but it wasn't the anxious, fearful look he had given so many times before. It was the confident look of a dog who knew he was loved and would be returning soon. As the car pulled away, Emma waved from the window. "See you Thursday, Max," she called. For the first time since this whole journey began, Max's tail wagged in response to a goodbye. 6 months later, the shared custody arrangement had evolved into something nobody could have predicted. Max had not only adapted to having two families, but he had become the bridge that connected two households in an extended community of care and friendship. The Williams family had successfully moved into their new apartment, a modest two-bedroom place with a small fenced yard, perfect for a growing German Shepherd. Tom's construction job had become permanent, and Jennifer had increased her hours at the daycare center. Their lives had stabilized in ways they hadn't thought possible during those desperate months when they first lost their housing. Max spent Monday through Thursday with the Williams family, where he had reclaimed his position as the children's constant companion and protector. Sarah and Michael had matured through the experience of losing and regaining their beloved dog, developing a deeper understanding of love, loss, and the complexities of adult responsibilities. Thursday evenings had become a celebration in the Patterson household, as Max would arrive for his long weekend stay with the enthusiasm of someone returning home after a journey. Emma had taught him to recognize the sound of the Williams family's car in the driveway, and he would position himself at the front door, tail wagging, ready for the transition. The piano sessions had resumed with even greater intensity. Emma had been taking more advanced lessons, partly inspired by Max's obvious enjoyment of music. She had learned several classical pieces that seemed to particularly captivate him, and their afternoon concerts had become a neighborhood attraction, with other children often gathering outside to listen and watch Max's musical appreciation. Dr. Chen continued to monitor Max's progress, amazed by his adaptation to the dual family arrangement. He's developed what I can only describe as situational personality adaptation, she explained during one of her regular check-ins. With the Williams family, he displays more of his original puppy behaviors, more playfulness and energy. With the Patterson family, he's calmer, more contemplative, almost therapeutic in his demeanor. The veterinarian's observations were accurate. Max seemed to understand that each family needed different things from him. With Sarah and Michael, he was a playmate and adventure companion, always ready for games and outdoor exploration. With Emma, he was a gentle friend and music lover, content to spend quiet afternoons in contemplation and creativity. Both families had learned to coordinate Max's care seamlessly. His veterinary appointments, grooming, training, and even his favorite toys moved fluidly between households. The Williams and Patterson families had developed their own friendship, often sharing meals, attending each other's family events, and supporting one another through various life challenges. The most remarkable development was Max's role as a community ambassador. His story had spread throughout the neighborhood and beyond, inspiring other families facing difficult decisions about their pets. The animal shelter where Officer Jake Williams worked had established a Max protocol, a program designed to help facilitate temporary fostering arrangements for families in crisis. Preventing abandonment by providing support networks, Margaret, the elderly woman who had first discovered Max in the shopping cart, had become an unofficial grandmother figure to both families. She visited regularly, bringing homemade treats for Max and wisdom gained from decades of loving and losing pets. Her presence provided continuity and stability that helped everyone remember the journey that had brought them together. Emma had written a school report about Max's story that won a district-wide essay contest. Her paper, titled "The Dog Who Taught Us About Different Kinds of Love," had been published in the local newspaper and shared widely on social media. The essay eloquently explained how Max had shown her that love doesn't always mean ownership, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is share what matters most to you. The shopping center where Max had been found had erected a small memorial plaque near the entrance, not for Max himself, but for all abandoned pets and the people who care for them. The plaque read, "In memory of faithful companions waiting to be found and in honor of those who never stop looking for them." Max's behavior had completely stabilized over the months. He no longer spent time anxiously watching from windows, no longer startled at unexpected sounds, and no longer showed signs of the abandonment trauma that had initially defined his personality. Instead, he had developed into a confident, well-adjusted dog who seemed to understand that his life was richer for having multiple sources of love and security. The most touching evidence of his transformation came during a thunderstorm that struck on a Thursday evening while Max was transitioning between families. Instead of seeking comfort from either the Williams or Patterson family, he positioned himself in the space between both cars in the driveway, as if protecting both of his families simultaneously. Tom Williams had been offered a promotion that would require the family to relocate to another state. The decision about whether to accept the job led to the first serious discussion about Max's long-term future. Since the custody arrangement had begun, "Can't ask Max to start over again in a new place," Jennifer said during a family meeting that included both households. "He's finally found peace and stability." But Emma, now 9 years old and wiser for her experiences, had a different perspective. "Max isn't going to start over," she said with remarkable insight. "Wherever he goes, he'll always have all of us in his heart. That's what makes him special." The decision was made for the Williams family to accept the promotion, but with a modified custody arrangement that would allow Max to spend summers and school vacations with them in their new location, while living primarily with the Patterson family during the school year. It was another unconventional solution, but everyone had learned that conventional approaches didn't always work for extraordinary circumstances. On Max's last day before the Williams family's move, both families gathered at the original shopping center for a celebration. Max seemed to understand the significance of the location, sniffing around the area where the shopping cart had sat, as if acknowledging his journey from abandonment to belonging. Emma had prepared a surprise for the occasion. She had learned to play for Elise on a portable keyboard, and she performed the piece while Max sat beside her in the same spot where he had waited so faithfully months earlier. Other shoppers stopped to listen, and several people who remembered Max's original story joined the impromptu concert. As the music ended, Max looked around at all the faces surrounding him, his tail wagging contentedly. He seemed to understand that his waiting had led to something far better than he had originally hoped for. Instead of being returned to one family, he had gained an extended community of people who cared about his well-being. The plaque near the shopping center entrance caught the afternoon sunlight, and Margaret read the inscription aloud one final time. "In memory of faithful companions waiting to be found, and in honor of those who never stop looking for them." Max's story had begun with abandonment and patient waiting, but it had evolved into something much more profound, a testament to the idea that love multiplies when it's shared, that families can be created as well as born, and that sometimes the most faithful wait leads not to what we lost, but to what we never knew we needed. As the two families prepared to part ways for the move, Max moved confidently between them, offering comfort to everyone who was struggling with the goodbye. He had learned the most important lesson of all, that love doesn't end when circumstances change, and that the bonds formed through crisis and recovery can weather any storm. The little German shepherd who had once sat motionless in a shopping cart, waiting for a family that couldn't return, had become the heart of an extended family that would never let him wait alone again.